Welcome back, September 18th. This is the third Wednesday of the month, and this is when I present a book to all of you. This month's book is called Raising Good Humans. It was recommended to me by a friend. I hadn't actually read it before, but I enjoyed it a lot. It's fairly simple. If you've been keeping up and reading the books this year or coming to the summaries, you're going to see some common themes and suggestions that various authors are making in different ways. Everybody has their own way of telling you and telling us like what's most useful. But what I really liked about this book is that she is a mom herself, and she's very vulnerable in talking about how when her kids were young, parenthood was not what she expected, and it was a lot harder than she expected. And even sharing a time when her toddler wasn't napping, and she basically shook her child or grabbed her child and was very forceful to the point that the kid kind of freaked out. And then she freaked out because she was surprised and scared by her own emotional reactivity. And so for her, what worked to help her kind of calm her own survival brain and be able to have an increasing space between a trigger, like her child crying and being inconsolable, and her response, which initially was driven by her own survival instincts, that fight, flight, or freeze. She got triggered to fight with her child, and she was scared by that. And I really strongly believe that we can only have one driver of our brain at a time. It's either the downstairs brain or the upstairs brain or our true self, which is really kind of our spiritual connection. So what worked for Miss Clark Fields is her spiritual connection, and she found that through mindfulness practice. And she gave us some tools, which I'm going to share with you in the actionable PDF for this month, to help us put that into practice and see if that really helps us to lengthen our fuse when it comes to things that our kids do that trigger us, so that we're not so reactive. And I think the key here is really you have to practice whatever it is. I can tell you, I'll be vulnerable with you as well. Like as a child psychiatrist, I've had probably way more training than most of you in what's normal child development, what works and what doesn't work, how we should respond to our children. And yet, when my kids were young, especially I remember very vividly when my daughter was like 4, she was still in preschool. So it was pandemic times, which were a stressful time for all of us, especially parents who were working and juggling homeschooling and all of that. And I remember just being at my wit's end. Actually, it was like kind of the end of the pandemic. So like 2022, we were still struggling. She was very sensitive and still is to the feeling of socks on her feet. And of course, as you're going out the door every morning, what's the last thing you need to do with your toddler but help them get their shoes and socks on? And I was working full time at Kaiser Permanente. My first patient of the day started at 8 a.m. I needed to leave the house by 7:30 at the latest, preferably like 7:15 because I drove her to preschool, which was on the way. But depending on how much of a meltdown she was having, that wasn't a quick drop off process. And this was still when the kids had to wear the masks and they had to have the temperature check and all of that stuff. So, and then when I got to work, I had to do the same thing, like be in this long line of nurses and doctors entering the hospital, getting their temperature screened, getting some little sticker that you could enter for the day. It was just a whole stressful process. And daily, we would have this battle about the socks and the shoes. And I never got to the point of shaking her, thankfully, but I did get to the point of forcefully, like just grabbing her, grabbing 3 pairs of socks from the bin, the shoes from the bin, sticking her in the car with no socks and delivering her to school and saying, like, I need you to help me figure this out. Like, it's your problem. I gotta go to work. So for me, what has helped me more, I had done mindfulness training in my residency training. I did something called mindfulness awareness practice. If any of you are interested and you live in the LA area, I know a lot of my people do. UCLA has a mindfulness awareness practice class. It's available virtually or in person, I think, at least. And it was very good, but I never was able to take that mindfulness practice that I was doing in class and make it a daily part of my life. And it's still not a daily part of my life. But what I realized, and I learned this just very recently from a friend of mine who's introduced me to a different kind of guru and spiritual educator who has taught me that you don't need to sit down on a cushion and quietly meditate. You can connect to that true self, that quiet place, that awareness in your day-to-day life as you go about it. And she does talk about that as well. These are very kind of ancient Buddhist principles, Eastern principles, and she'll give us some examples of how to use that. But before we go there, let me just introduce myself in case any of you are no, this is just Kate and Susie. You both know me, so it's all good. But for those of you on the replay, or if you're watching this later, you can find more about me at theparentdoctor.com. You can sign up for my free weekly newsletter and this monthly book club, which happens the third Wednesday of every month. I offer courses and coaching for parents, and I'm a psychiatrist and psychotherapist for California residents. So if you haven't already listened, I have a podcast called the Parent Doctor Podcast. You can listen to it on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And it would help me out a lot if you can take a listen. And if you like it, rate it and share it with your friends, get them to read it too. And I'm now going to be offering a new monthly subscription. My goal as the Parent Doctor is really to support parents as much as possible in a way that is affordable and accessible and actionable to all of you. So I'm offering a monthly office hours subscription for the low monthly price of $29. And the first Friday of every month, kind of like the book club, but this will be more live topics. So all members will submit their questions to me via text message or email. And then those topic suggestions also will become the foundation for the course, or for not a course, for the call each month. It'll go about 60 to 90 minutes. You can ask live question and answers. They will be recorded if you can't make it to the live call, but you can have access to the replay. And then this will become basically a growing library of resources and learning from other people's questions and experiences. It's not a replacement for medical diagnosis or care or treatment. It's not me as a psychiatrist taking care of people in a group, but it is me giving all of my educational advice and experience and making it available to as many people as possible. So that is the video
Each month on the
here.
first Friday at 10 a.m.
Can you hear
Pacific,
this, guys?
I'm going to hop on a Zoom call, present on a
Yeah,
different
okay.
topic each month, and answer any questions that have been submitted. You can submit questions ahead of time via email to hello@theparentdoctor.com or via text message directly to me. If you want the question to be anonymous, actually, I will handle all questions that are submitted anonymously. If you want to ask me something live, you can hop on the Zoom call and ask me that as well. Basically, this is like having a best friend who's a child psychiatrist that you can just bug and ask questions of anytime you want. You'll never have to wait longer than a month to get a question answered, and you can shoot me a text anytime something comes up with your kids that you want me to address. In medicine, we call this a curbside consult. It's like when we want to ask a specialist opinion, but we don't want to go through the whole hassle of like requesting an official consult and documenting that in the patient's record. We can just be like, hey, can I ask you a question? So this is basically a curbside consult for parents. And I think there's a big need for this. The hurdle just to get off the wait list to see a child psychiatrist is huge. I know there's so many parents who have questions where it's not to the level that they necessarily think they need to bring a child to a child psychiatrist, but they still want to know, is this normal? And then also for all of you who are busy professional parents in 2024, there are just a lot of questions we have about how do we balance our kids' needs with our needs. And especially if you are in middle age and kind of at the peak of your own career, how do you balance your own career trajectory, your own productivity demands with your kids' development and their needs, right? Especially as moms, I know this is a question that a lot of us have, and that's something that I definitely want to address in the office hours space. So thank you for being here. Take care.
All right. So let's get into this book. The book is divided into two sections. Part one is breaking the cycle of reactivity. So as I sort of introduced this idea that for all of us, I think we can relate to the idea that we put in effort, we care about our kids, we listen to podcasts, we watch reels, we might see and talk to therapists and psychiatrists and experts, and we want to do better. And yet, if you're like me, if you're a human being, knowing something, having the idea of, yeah, I'm going to try that, I'm going to do that next time is one thing. But being able to implement it when you're triggered to lose your cool is a totally different thing, because the information is stored in our prefrontal cortex, the logical part of our brain. But when the downstairs brain, the emotional part of our brain, is activated to be in the driver's seat, we can no longer access that. So the key really is to be able to get your survival brain out of the driver's seat and to be able to have your logical prefrontal cortex brain in the driver's seat so you can access the things that you know when you are with your kids losing your cool or being triggered. So there's a quote here from Jon Kabat-Zinn. If you don't know him, he is a Westerner, an American doctor who really brought a lot of Eastern approaches and translated them to useful tools in the practice of mindfulness and mindful meditation. And he has a lot of great books, but he has this analogy: you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. He has another analogy of like sailboats, that like you can't direct your sailboat in a storm, but you can decide when you're going to pull the sails down and stop being tossed and turned by the wind. So basically, we can't control what happens to us in life. We can't control what our kids do, what our bosses do, all of the events around us. But what is within our control is our response. But it takes practice. So, how do we do that? In the book, she talks a lot about mindful meditation. And this basically involves sitting quietly with yourself, usually starting by focusing on your breath or focusing on a sensation or focusing on a candle or an object to quiet your mind. And then what will inevitably happen is your monkey mind will do what it does, and thoughts are going to come in. You're going to start thinking about a to-do list thing, a grocery bill, something, something, what am I going to make for dinner? And when you're led in good mindful meditation practice, you learn not to judge that, not to criticize yourself when it happens, but just to note it, thinking, labeling, and you start labeling those thoughts as they come up. Breathing and active breathing can be very, very helpful for silencing the survival mind and decreasing those neuronal pathways that get activated when we are stressed. So when we're stressed, we tend to breathe in the upper part of our lungs, short, shallow breaths. So practicing deep breathing through your diaphragm can be very helpful. Some people find this really uncomfortable. So if you live in kind of a chronic state of high stress, if your cortisol levels are always really high, if I tell you, like, take a deep breath, it feels weird, and that triggers more stress at first. So this is something you should be aware of. If you've tried it and you haven't found luck with it and you feel like it's just not helpful for you, that's not the case. It's not that you're special and breathing deeply doesn't work for you. It's that right now, breathing deeply feels weird. So you want to gradually work on slowly breathing deeply. And there's all kinds of different ways to do this. There's something called 4-square breathing, where you breathe in for 4 seconds, pause for 4 seconds. So you're holding air in your lungs. Then you exhale slowly for 4 seconds, and you again pause for 4 seconds before inhaling. There's other things called like, I forget what Andrew Weil's thing. It's like 6, 7, 8 breathing. You breathe in for 6, hold for 7, breathe out for 8. There's something called a diaphragmatic sigh, where you breathe in as deep as you can. And this is something that you have to build up to feel normal doing it. Because if you don't usually do deep breathing and you try to breathe in as deep as you can, pause, and then breathe in a little bit more, and then slowly exhale, it'll feel really weird. But as you get used to it, this is super effective at activating the vagus nerve, which is a signal that goes from our heart and lungs up to our brain, and silencing the survival brain signals that are otherwise coming. It slows your heart rate, it slows your breathing, it decreases stress hormones. It's very physiologically beneficial to you. The physiological sigh has actually been studied in research in Andrew Huberman's lab at Stanford. That's that deep breath in, hold, breathe in a little bit more, and then slowly breathe out. If you do that for 5 minutes a day, it's more effective for reducing stress than mindful meditation, just that physical active breathing. Then there's a body scan. So this is kind of where, if you're someone who has a hard time sitting and letting your mind be clear, you sit and you think about your body. You think about tensing your muscles. How do your muscles feel on the top of your head? You kind of work your way slowly down your body. I'll share with you guys a YouTube like audio for that if you want to try a body scan meditation. Some people really like that physical focus of that type of meditation. And then for people like me who find all of this hard, there's mindfully doing, just trying to be aware in your day-to-day life when you're eating, when you're walking, when you're washing dishes. In the book, she gives a great example from Thich Nhat Hanh of, if you are washing your dishes, just be present in that moment. Like, feel how good the water feels on your hands, wash the bowl as if it's the only thing that you need to do today, and like take pleasure in the activity, which is, for most of us, I think, a change from how we would normally go through those repetitive daily actions that, at least for me, tend to get under my nerves and make me upset. So the key here is really try it. Try any of these things for 5 minutes a day for the next week or two and see how it feels for you. I don't know which of these is going to work for you. Like, obviously, the author of this book, mindfulness and sitting quietly with her thoughts, worked really well for her. And it does work for me to help me feel calmer, but it hasn't helped me in the same way that this Advaita training that I'm doing now has helped me, which is really about recognizing in every moment that I am aware. And one of the keys to that, I'll say it here, it might resonate with you, it might not, but the idea is that my eyes right now are seeing you, right? I'm the seer. My mind is aware of my eyes. So my mind is the seer and my eyes are the seeing. And me, the real me, my awareness is aware of my mind. So it's the seer and my mind is the seeing. So ultimately, the true seer is not my body, It's not my senses. It's separate and behind all of that. And that's there all the time. And all I have to do is remember and kind of connect to it. So all of this is kind of key for disarming your triggers. And in my course, which Susie and Kate are part of, Unlocking Love, we talk about recognizing earthquakes in our house of woe. This being an analogy that I've come up with for what a trigger is. So I live in Southern California, there's lots of earthquakes here. And when we have expectations, we basically have built an internal structure of how the world should be. And then when we go through our days and it doesn't end up being like that, we experience earthquakes in that house of woe. She calls these triggers, you can call it whatever you want. But basically, this is the idea that sometimes things don't go the way we expect, and we have an emotional response to that. So in order to disarm the triggers, especially those of our children and how they push our buttons, and we all know that they do, we first need to raise awareness of what they are. You can't, defuse that bomb until you know where it is and where, it's going to go off. So the PDF I'm making you for this month that you'll be able to find here in the Facebook group and look in your email as well for it if you're subscribed to the book club is going to have questions about how you were parented to help you tune into the things that your child does that trigger you. These are derived from the adult attachment interview, and this is a very evidence-based way for clinicians to work with their therapy patients and kind of help them explore what is it from your own past, from your own childhood, that might lead you to feel sensitive in certain situations with your child. And that's different for all of us, right? So wherever your needs weren't met as a child, and that may be in an extreme way if you were the victim of abuse or neglect, or in a mild way if you generally had it good, but sometimes you and your parents just didn't see things eye to eye, or there was something really important to you that your parents weren't able to support you on. Those are times when your needs weren't met. And when the same situation or a similar situation comes up with your kid where they're telling you their needs aren't met, it's going to trigger within you and within me, it just does, this childlike inability to handle it. Because again, we're going to feel like, oh, this was a problem for me back then. And even though now I'm an adult, I don't feel like I have the skills to handle this now. For me, this is, it's gotten a lot better since my son's gotten older, but my oldest child, who's now 12, was a very deeply feeling kid, a very emotionally intense kid. And he would have these big meltdowns, these big emotional meltdowns, which would be very triggering for me because when I was a kid, my parents weren't able to really soothe me. So what I learned to do was withdraw. I remember like being a child and sobbing in my room, those sobs that were like, breathing like that. I remember just doing that. It felt like it was hours and no one came to comfort me, right? So when he would have these things, because no one had come to comfort me as a child, I would feel like I can't handle this. I don't know what to do. And it's taken me a long time to kind of work through being able to be present with him and just know that he just needs me to be there. And all I need to do is just say like, I'm sorry you're feeling so bad, but I'm here for you. And now we're much more able to communicate those hard things. And of course, he's also gotten older and more mature. His brain is better at soothing itself now, which is good. But with my second child, I was much better than with my first child. So if you're aware and conscious and you want to grow, these are actually wonderful opportunities for you. And so you have to look at these difficult moments that you have with your child as something that's actually a big gift for you to really see a place where maybe in your own past, you didn't get the support and help that you needed, but that doesn't mean that now as an adult, you'll never be able to handle it. It gives you the map to kind of focus on like, what do I need to do here to feel okay so that I can help my child feel okay in this situation and be there for them as a cycle breaker in a way that maybe your parents weren't able to be there for you. The next chapter is about practicing compassion. And the main idea is that we have to be compassionate with ourselves if we want to be compassionate with our kids. It's impossible to show compassion to someone else if you can't first find compassion towards yourself. And I know a lot of moms who talk about mom guilt and beat themselves up. Many of the moms I talk to have a lot of self-critical thoughts, especially when things don't go the way they want. So one of the tools here is a loving kindness meditation, and I'll give you a link to that too, with the idea being that you just wish yourself and everyone else in the world peace and ease, and breathing meditations as well. Now, you may think that by being compassionate with yourself, you'll be too soft, or by being compassionate with your kids, you'll be too soft and that this will set them up for failure. But there's actually evidence to the contrary, Those of us who practice compassion towards ourselves, recover faster from setback. So maybe we're a little slower to get going if we take it easy and we're not driven by that, fight, flight, or freeze kind of juice. But if we're compassionate with ourselves, when there is a setback, we get up faster. So ultimately, you go farther in life if you're compassionate with yourself, and your relationship with your kids will be much stronger as well. All right, the next chapter is about taking care of difficult feelings. And this was a chapter that brought in a lot of very Buddhist principles, one of which is something I've read from the Dalai Lama, which is avoidance leads to fear, fear leads to hatred, and hatred leads to violence or intolerance or aggression. And so pain plus resistance leads to suffering. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So here with our kids, they are going to experience pain, and it is not our job as parents to protect them from that or to prevent them from experiencing that pain. But what we can do is help them see that resistance of the pain, inability to just sit with it and accept it for what is now, knowing that it's temporary, will lead to more suffering. So if your child's having a hard time and you can't tolerate them having a hard time, you're going to cause them more suffering because they're going to develop within themselves a resistance to accepting that pain, a need to set it aside, and it will then come back in some other form at some other time. So for us as parents to really be able to support our kids to feel all their feelings in the moment, even when it's an inconvenient time, to know that those negative feelings, even when they're really intense, won't last forever, is going to help reduce our suffering and our kids' suffering in the long run, even though in that moment we want to avoid it, right? We want to avoid it because we're afraid of it, we don't like it, but pushing through that avoidance and just allowing it to be is a very, very powerful thing. All right, so part 2 is about raising kind and confident children. And here we're going to hear sort of echoes of a book we did earlier in the year called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families by Stephen Covey. He's one of my favorite speakers and authors, although he's now gone. He was a great gift to humanity, but he really talked about the levels of listening. If you remember, I shared with you that there's 3 levels of listening that really don't count at all to make a deposit in our joint emotional bank account with our kids. Level 4 and level 5 listening are the only types of listening that really do. And she's basically saying the same thing, that we want to reflect what we hear our kids saying when they have a problem. And then beyond that, we seek to understand the emotion behind it before we want them to understand our advice or where we're coming from or what we need. We first want to really listen to what they have to say. And listening at this high level deepens your connection with your child more than almost anything else. This is a skill we all should be working on all the time. And if you need any help with it, please reach out to me. Again, we don't have to solve or fix our kids' problems, whether it's, they got to school and they forgot their lunchbox. You do not have to drive the lunchbox to school. You can encourage the school to problem solve with your child and see how can they solve that problem. We want to develop problem solving skills for our kids. And every time we step in to be the solution or propose the solution or fix it ourselves, we rob them of building that strength. And we want to maintain what's called a beginner's mind. In meditation and in Buddhism, this basically means like coming into a situation without preconceived notions. Imagine yourself just as a blank slate, collecting information as you're listening to your child and say like, oh, okay, so this is what I'm hearing you saying. That said, she does warn us, like when you practice reflective listening, there's another slide about this, might be the next one actually, let's see. No, but when you practice, reflective listening, you don't want to use the same, like, I hear you saying this, or okay, what I hear you saying is this. If you do that over and over, at some point your kid's going to catch on and be really annoyed by your reflective listening. So when you do reflective listening, we'll get to another slide about the tips and tricks and how you want to do it and how you don't want to do it, because it can feel weird and phony, and you don't want it to feel that way. In order to be effective, it has to feel very natural and genuine to your child. Okay, I liked this a lot. We had, I think it was February, our book club was called The Family Board Meeting. The authors are Jim and Jamie Shields. The idea there is that quarterly, 4 times a year, it can be very valuable to spend 4 hours one-on-one with each of your children individually. Just you, just them. No screens. Your child dictates what the activity is going to be. You go along with it. Don't give any suggestions or criticisms. And you just enjoy time with your child where they're at, doing what they want to do. In this book, She makes it a little bit more approachable, I think, because that's great. And I've done those board meetings, and I can tell you, if you have time to do them, it's absolutely worth it. You're going to see a really positive change in your kids' relationship with you if you can invest that time. But I realize that some of you have many children. Some of you are very busy, and finding half a day, 4 times a year, is a challenge. So even if you can't devote that kind of a big block of time, it can be extremely helpful to give your kids just special time. Set 10 minutes on a timer or 5 minutes on a timer. Start slow. This is like if you want to run a marathon, that would be like a 4 hours, family board meeting. And it seems daunting. Like if 5 minutes is hard for you, then don't beat yourself up about the fact that a family board meeting 4 hours long is not something that you can yet do. Be compassionate and understand that just as if you were trying to learn to run a marathon and you were someone who didn't run at all, it's going to take practice and time, but with consistent effort, you're going to get better and better at it. So start with very simply like 5 minutes. Say to your child, like, hey, I want us to start having some special time, just one-on-one. Put your phone away, turn off the screens, set a timer for 5 minutes, and ask them, like, what would you like to do with me if you had 5 minutes? And again, do this at a time that they want to do it. If they're doing something else and you're imposing this and saying, we're going to have special time right now, that's not going to be as welcomed as it would be if you kind of float this idea to them and then let them initiate it when they want to. So basically, the idea here is that by letting our kids be in control, even if it's just for a 5-minute period every few days, it gives them some sense of autonomy and agency. It lets them lead us, whereas most of the time in our interactions with our kids, we are leading them. And it therefore is a really big deposit in your joint emotional bank account with them, because they feel like you're open and receptive to their suggestions. And that makes them more likely to reciprocate when you're asking them to comply with your suggestions and requests. She uses an acronym called the RAIN method for emotional well-being. The first letter is R, and that is recognize, like label the emotion you're feeling. Generally, this book is a lot about recognizing our own emotional states through the way that our body makes us feel. And then the A is accept. And again, she has a Thich Nhat Hanh quote here and suggestion, which is imagine, like if you're feeling frustrated, imagine frustration like a baby in your arms. What would you say? I see you, frustration. I'm here with you. It's okay. Again, it's that trying to quiet the survival mind that's telling you like, I can't tolerate this frustration. I don't want this to be the case. That fear that gets initiated in avoidance, that we want to be away from it. Instead, see if you can cuddle your negative emotion and soothe, talk to it, accept it. Then investigate, be curious about it. Try to explore, now that you've quieted your survival mind, can you explore what is it that's leading me to feel this way? Why might I be feeling this way? Maybe it's related to one of your triggers that you might do from the exercise I'm going to give you. And maybe you can kind of work through that. And then finally, nurture. Convey that you and your child are lovable, that you are enough, and that you are good despite this negative emotion you're experiencing, which is temporary, just like a wave in the ocean. All right, then she talks about solving problems mindfully. This is where she discusses the importance of reflective listening, but also talks about some of the pitfalls and how you can do it wrong. So you want to basically repeat what you hear from your child and then seek to understand the emotion behind the words that they're saying. So you might want to ask questions like, okay, so blah, 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 is that right? Or I hear what you're saying. Am I getting this right? So, but you don't want to always use the same phrases. You don't want to always say, what I hear you saying is blah, 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 because eventually your kid will catch on to the fact that that's how you respond every time they come to you with a problem, and it'll be annoying to them. So you've got to change it up. You don't want to overuse reflective listening either, because if you do it too often, if you do it not when there's a problem, but just when they're telling you something, it's again going to be annoying and feel frustrating to them. And you don't want to be patronizing when you are reflecting. I think we can imagine, especially, I don't know if you have partners, but my husband and I try to do this with each other too. And it's very easy, especially when you're talking to another adult, especially when you're talking to your spouse, if you have one, to kind of slip up and not be that genuine and be kind of patronizing. When you're like, okay, so I hear you saying blah, 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 or kind of, your tone might convey your emotion. Try to neutralize that. Try to just be a fact based person in your reflection, and try to genuinely be seeking to understand where they're coming from and embrace your own curiosity about it. All right, the next chapter was called Saying the Right Things, and she suggests using I messages we recommend this all the time when we're in therapy with our patients. If you have a problem with someone and you use an iMessage, this is useful not just for our children. It can be useful with coworkers, with our bosses, with our spouses, with our friends and family members. The idea is you say like, when this happens, I feel this. And, so you want to describe the behavior or situation, describe the effect it has on you, and how you feel about it. So you can use this for both negative and positive emotional states. Example would be telling your kids, I feel frustrated with this mess in the room right now. Another example of a positive emotion would be, I feel so happy to see that you shared with your sister. If these are hard for you to do, and again, this is exactly the kind of thing where I can tell you this, you can know it in your prefrontal cortex that you want to try this, but it's going to be very easy for any of us to walk into a messy room later today and say to our kids, like, what the heck, you guys, this is a mess. Like, clean this up right now, right? It's easy to slip back into the old ways. So we have to think about, what are the triggers for us? Where do I lose my cool? And how ahead of time can I implement something different? I'll give you an example for my daughter with the socks and shoes. So once it finally dawned on me that I was contributing to my suffering in this problem by not accepting the pain that I had, I decided to embrace a different version of myself and be playful. So the next day, when it was time to put on her socks, I took a pair of her little like toddler socks and stuck them on my ears. And I went to her and I was like, Emily, I need your help. I can't find your socks. Your Cookie Monster socks, where are they? And she looked at me and just busted out laughing. And she was like, they're on your ears, mommy. And it totally changed the dynamic between us from being this like repetitive, stressful, suffering thing of like, it's time to put on your socks, put them on, to then she was pulling them off my ears. And I was like, oh, where did this go? And then I was trying to put them on her ears. And she's like, no, they go on my feet. And she put them on her feet. So again, when you can start shifting yourself by recognizing the pattern ahead of time, knowing it and being on that defensive or offensive, I don't know, but preventatively planning for how you might do it differently, thinking about how you might use an I statement next time something comes up that your kids trigger you, it'll be helpful. If this is hard for you to do, if you can't think of how would I say this as an I statement, imagine the thing that your child does that bothers you is done by one of their friends, and imagine how you would approach a child who's your friend's child in your house about that issue. So if your child had a friend over and they left their dirty dishes on the table, would you say like, are you kidding me? Get back in here and clean up your mess? Or would you say like, oh, Sally, I noticed you left your dishes on the table and that just makes me feel kind of frustrated because our kitchen looks messy and I'm about to prepare dinner. Would you mind putting those back in the dishwasher or something? That's going to be a much kinder and more effective way to get your kids to comply. I think this is the final chapter. She talks about supporting a peaceful home. I think this is really important for all of us too. Touch with our kids is really important. I give my kids massages every night. There's a lot of touching and playing. Roughhousing is important with kids. I think this is something that dads generally do better with than moms, but it is important. Our kids do enjoy. And again, anytime they're telling you to stop, you stop. You don't want to push the boundaries, push it too far, but rough and tumble play, racing, those kinds of things give kids a thrill and help them feel connected to you at the level of high energy that they have as children. Special time we talked about can be as little as 5 minutes, as long as 4 hours. But the idea is that you're completely devoted to doing whatever your kid wants to do. They are driving that time and you are going along with it. You're not making suggestions. You're not asking questions. You're not criticizing. You're just being with them. Giving kids chores and work is really important because it develops their sense of agency and autonomy. It helps them feel proud in the things that they are able to do. Having a consistent routine and rhythm in your household, whether that's your morning routine, your evening routine, the meals that you eat each night, the days that you have family meals, those kinds of things can also be very soothing, especially for kids who really thrive on routine, which is most of them. And then decreasing and monitoring clutter. This is a never-ending battle in my house. I feel like, our parents were kind of lucky to grow up without Target and Amazon. There's just so much stuff in our lives now, and it therefore becomes part of our life as modern parents to need to also be getting stuff out of the house as often as we're bringing it in. And that's something that my parents didn't really teach me, but I'm working hard to try to teach my kids. And then she suggests, consider if you're feeling stressed, cutting back on activities that your kids are involved in, because ultimately kids do need downtime. They need time that isn't structured with other things. They need time to be bored and curious and just explore. And it's very easy now because we're always hearing about the things that other parents are doing with their kids, the activities that they're in. Our kids want to be with their friends. But many of us have kids who have a commute to get to school, a long day at school, a commute to get to activities. They get home, they have to eat, do their homework, and there's no time in there to really be just free. And so take a look at it. We have downsized our activities a few times over the last few years, and each time we've all felt like it was much better on the other side of that. Even though it is hard to make that decision, both for us and for our kids, to give up something that they enjoy, but having free time is really important. All right. Oh, and then she suggests something that's good, which is encourage fun after the hard part. So first we do homework, then we play video games. First we clean our room or clean our house, then we invite our friend over. This is just a good habit for us to instill in our children so that as they grow into adults, they are also people who do the things they need to do before the things that they just want to do. All right, so in conclusion, I think this book, Raising Good Humans, offers a pretty transformative approach to parenting by emphasizing the importance of mindfulness, can't read what this says over here, empathy and emotional awareness. But with all the books we've talked about, just reading them and knowing these facts isn't enough. You have to do the work, and I can't tell you what that work will be for you. If it were true that if everybody meditated for 5 minutes a day, you would never have any issues with your kids and your fuse would be long, you'd always be your patient, most, best parenting self, then we would all be meditating for 5 minutes a day. But I'm going to guess that many of you have tried that before, and it might not be the thing that's going to work best for you. So I encourage you to try and try and try until you find something that really, in your experience, seems to help you be less reactive, get through the tough moments with your kid, and also spend the time completing this month's PDF. I think of all the ones I've done, I think this one's probably the most important and the most valuable. Answer these questions. So it's a bunch of questions that I said, again, put them in the book. They're derived from the adult attachment interview, which was an interview developed by a therapist, a psychologist, to be able to relate to adults. As adults, we come in and we're like, my childhood was fine, or maybe we tell ourselves the story that it was horrible. But by asking these questions of, was there ever time that you were alone or separated from your parents? How did your parents handle discipline? How did they handle stress? All of these things. You'll actually find that marinating in those questions is going to bring up memories for you that you haven't thought of in a long time. So what I suggest when you get that PDF is read through the questions, maybe read through them once a day for a few days, and just kind of let them sit with yourself. And then when you have time, sit down in a quiet place for like 30 minutes with a pen, or sit on your computer because it's a fillable PDF, and write your answers to those questions. And if anything comes up for you that's really difficult that you want help processing, feel free to reach out to me. You can go to my website and schedule a 30-minute call for free. You can email me at hello@theparentdoctor. Yeah, that's it. Basically, try it. Find out what works for you. Let me look on the Facebook group and see if there's anybody there. Kate and Susie, do you guys have any questions for me about this one?
That was lovely. I loved it. I'm going to listen again too. Thanks, Marissa.
You're welcome, ladies. Great to see you.
Can you send the link to the PDF?
Yeah, so I think, Susie, you should be in the book club. Are you on the Facebook group? And I don't know, I'll check. If you're not, though, I will send it to you. I'll add you to the book club list so that you get these emails. So basically what happens after these book clubs is right now I'm broadcasting on Facebook Live, right? So we have a private group for the book club, which you're welcome to join. If you prefer, though, to not join the Facebook group, or if you're not on Facebook, that's fine. Everybody who's on my email list tagged as a book club member automatically gets afterwards the replay, this video, and the actionable PDF. So I'll make sure that you've got that tag so that you get this too, okay? But within the Facebook group, if anybody's listening on Facebook, you go to the media tab at the top of the group, and all the PDFs for each book are there. And you can watch all of the replays as well within the Facebook group. All right. And then, ladies, if you have any suggestions, or anyone watching this as a replay too, if you have suggestions for next year's book club, I'm starting to make the list. I made a Google form where you can vote on the books that I've come up with that I think would be good topics if you like them, and you can add extra ones if there's something that you've been wanting to read or that you've heard is a good read. Please just input that, like, name your own candidate kind of thing. And then we'll get the list ready probably within the next month or two for 2025, because I'm having a lot of fun with book club and I intend to continue it. next year. All right. Thank you. Bye. Take care.